about like the Big Bang, you have that right after. It is a theory in the sense that we know certain aspects of it. We have a lot of data are true, but there's also a lot about it that we don't know. We don't understand the creation of matter. We don't fully understand exactly what a singularity is, the expansion process, and so on and so forth. So when you say the Big Bang happened, again, relatively it's true, but there's such limited data and knowledge on it in terms of what's really out there that when you say it happened, I mean, it's just a kind of a blanket statement. Do you think it happened exactly as prescribed by certain physicists, or do you have your own interpretation of what the Big Bang is? What does that mean to you?
I don't have my own interpretation of it. I just we know what we know, and there's quite a lot about. I mean, there's a huge amount about Big Bang cosmology that we know with
Correct. Yep.
extremely high certainty. We're kind of unsure about inflation, but inflation is something that happened for a period of time of 10 to the negative 34th seconds. So that's extremely small. We don't know why we have a matter antimatter asymmetry in our universe.
Yep.
That's a question that we're working on, but I think a lot of us get stuck on a lot of us think that how do I say this? We confuse the body with with counting of the facts. Okay, so like we don't know about the matter antimatter asymmetry. We don't know very much about that yet. We don't know very much about inflation yet. But and then what do we know? So like we know that the universe is expanding. We know that there is a microwave background radiation everywhere. We know that there's a homologous distribution of galaxies around the universe. So people think that we're like, well, we're 60% of the way there. No, we're so much more than 60% of the way there, because there's an unthinkable number of like other pieces of data and specifics within the model, and other predictions that are in there, that we know. Like the stuff we don't know is literally the fringe of what we don't know yet.
Yeah, see, where I would argue that is that that is of the observable universe in terms of what is third dimensional reality, which includes matter, right? So not understanding what the creation of matter comes from, not understanding the full depth of wormholes and things like that, leads us to be, whether it was like some people use religion as it, quantum physics is attempting to describe it in a more factual and scientific way. But some of those answers, which we don't know, could change the entire fabric of the understanding we have now, as quantum physics is already doing with physics. Adding on these different pieces that we know changes everything about the foundation that we have. So just because we think we're 70% of the way there means that that's 70% of we know for sure of what we can see and what we can, track data on. But not understanding that 30% may change that 70% and reduce that number significantly if we understand that there's more that, plays into these factors of what creationism is, how it starts, and so on and so forth.
Well, that to sort of play devil's advocate, that what that could actually end up doing is ushering in some sort of like different paradigm shift where it literally opens up a brand new scientific theory, which would actually describe other things. So like, oh, I don't know if I have a good example of this.
I understand what you're saying.
Like, damn it, what would be a good example? Um, so like, we had the theory of evolution before we knew about DNA, right? And now DNA confirmed exactly what we thought would be the case with evolution. DNA conveys genetic information, and if you analyze the DNA between two individuals, you can tell how closely related they are. And that matched perfectly with all of the predictions we already had for evolution, right?
Yep.
But genetics didn't fundamentally overthrow evolution and usher in and replace it with something else. DNA and genetics is just its own branch of science, and it can be part of evolution, but it didn't. It it only confirmed the underlying aspects of evolution, which is that there's variation. Like Darwin's fundamental premises were there's variation in a population, more individuals are born than can survive to reproductive maturity. The things that make organisms different are heritable. Nature will select those that have bad fitness and favor those that have good fitness, and this causes populations to change over time, and over long periods of time entire different species emerge. Nothing about DNA changed any of those things. It taught us more about how they work. And so, like, what you're saying is it's cool and it's enlightened, and it's your I can tell that you kind of know how to think about these things, but I would say that that probably won't end up making the Big Bang obsolete,
No,
because genetics didn't make the theory of evolution obsolete in any
well, I'm
way.
not
I
suggesting
think
that
if something like what you're talking about will happen, it will just create a brand new field of science.
again, theoretically possible, absolutely. But this would I would admit that this was probably a bad example because it is rooted in kind of more subjective beliefs. But like the Darwinism coming along also changed all of what quote unquote modern science had determined to be true about the nature of individuals and species. Obviously, again, I will admit it was very limited. A lot of it was rooted in religious belief systems, right? So they had kind of made up, and then especially a lot of it rooted in racism. I liked a lot your points earlier on anthropology, and not having differences in superiority based on intellect or things like that. That's like one of the first things they go over in anthropology. However, that would be an example somewhat of an entire collective shift in thought. Now, one is scientific, one is far less scientific. But again, just with physics and quantum physics is changing a lot of what we have believed to be laws of saying matter cannot be created. Now we're having a shift in that with quantum physics. Are you familiar with like the double slit experiment and particle awareness?
Yes. So I'll
What's
let you
your
say
opinion
whatever
on
you want
that?
to say, but like really quick, I
Yeah,
would
go
say
ahead. Go
that
ahead.
we have the same thing here. Quantum physics didn't overturn classical physics at all. It's a completely different paradigm and realm of study.
Right. But again, my direct point was physics said, as a law, matter cannot be created. It can only be conserved, correct?
Well, it can be well, so but Einstein didn't even like a lot of aspects of quantum physics, but um, he came up with the energy mass equivalence. So we knew that like that actually came from not necessarily classical physics, but quantum mechanics didn't really doesn't really disagree with the idea that matter is always conserved. I mean that law basically has to be, if it's a scientific law, it's true in the quantum realm as well.
Well, again, all the recent research about matter being able to be created, which is the creation of energy, goes directly against what the law is, which is that matter and energy cannot be created. It can only be conserved. So
They can be transformed. You can turn matter into energy. That's
yeah,
once
right.
we figured that out a long time ago, and then we built nuclear bombs.
But that's still conservation of energy. It's still matter being turned into something, right? Energy is not just a nonsensical thing.
I don't know what you're talking about. Then what are you talking about? Like matter being spontaneously created?
You'd be hard pressed. I'd be hard pressed to pull up the scientific study off the top of my head. But quantum physics is saying now that we have been able to theorize and potentially prove that certain parts of I don't know if it was electrons or quarks, but that it could be created spontaneously. The same with like quantum jumping of electrons and things like that. So my point is that it didn't necessarily flip all of physics on its head, and it is a new field of study. But the more we learn about that, if we learn that there are certain parts that challenge, typical physics, our understanding of the Big Bang, and I just think that you saying we're over 60% of the way there without understanding anything that could change or create a new paradox of what we've already believed would be kind of a humanistic and, in my opinion, a slightly arrogant view of saying we're most of the way there. Just because we've studied most of what's observable to us. That doesn't mean that we have an understanding of what creation was, started from and so on and so forth, which could lay out the entire blueprint of the universe, which we're nowhere near discovering. If it could change everything if we have learned more about quantum physics or, I just think that saying we're over 60% of the way there is so fallible. There's nothing that backs that.
Well, okay, how do I want to say this? When I say that, I don't know how to actually quantify it, but what I'm
Understood.
saying is there's an enormous amount of evidence backing up the Big Bang. It's not just the individual claims, because like the individual pieces of it are kind of simple, but there's so much more that's actually going on there. It's kind of like with evolution. Like there's actually it's extremely simple. There's only a few things that undergird the basic scientific the basic framework of the theory, but there's within all of those there's a bottomless pit of information that's confirmed it. And I'm going to end up saying what I said again, but I don't think we actually disagree on this. I think that what you're saying is it's not wrong. It's just that I think whatever new if there are new avenues or discoveries behind this, I just think they're going to open up a brand new field of science, and it's it's not going to make the Big Bang obsolete or anything like
No,
that.
absolutely.
It may like I would how do I want to say this?
I
This is
think
going
the
to
Big
sound
Bang
weird
happened
and kind
too.
of
I agree with you on that to some extent. I just think that our nature of exactly what that is, because I'll tell you, I'm agnostic, leaning Christian. I think that it is more logical to believe in a creator than it is to not believe in a creator. I think that understanding what comes before that, what precedes the Big Bang, and what leads to a creation event, where does matter come from, and things like that, change the notion of what the Big Bang is. How do we form a singularity? I believe, I think it was Einstein's mistaken data, but then correct me if I'm wrong, but now we understand that the universe expands and expands and then eventually contracts back in on itself. So there
no.
could be many.
No, we have no evidence that it does that. When Einstein wrote, I can't remember if it was general or special relativity, but he put in what's called a cosmological constant in there. Now, I don't remember specifically what this does, but his idea assumed that the universe is static and doesn't really necessarily change. But then he wrote those papers in like 1906, I think it was.
Okay.
But then in 1929, I think it was, in the early 30s, then we learned that the universe is expanding. And Einstein famously called that his biggest blunder because he had to change it to make it fit with a universe that expands.
Okay.
But we no, there, all of our data says that the universe is just going to continue expanding forever.
Okay, fair enough. So, barring that point, everything else in regards to what precedes the Big Bang, what creates the singularity of which the Big Bang explodes from, and so on and so forth, explodes is a loose term there, very slow expansion. But talking about the precession of that, I think is kind of the most fundamental part. And it may not be attainable through our modern metrics of data. So I don't disagree that the Big Bang happened, but I just think that our basic understanding of the foundation of what creates a Big Bang event is too limited to have a true assumption of the entirety of the universe. You know what I mean? Like I just think it's too limited of a concept. It is, at the end of the day, I know you say it's a bad argument, the sentence before, but it is a relative theory. There's a lot of data regarding it, but it is by no means a concrete fact of all of existence in terms of just not knowing what precedes it.
Yeah, I don't know what precedes the big like preceding the Big Bang would be like what happened before the universe existed, and I have no idea. But the Big Bang's not even supposed to. It was never. It's not supposed to answer that. That's not
Agreed.
the purpose of it.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that understanding that precession alters the fundamental understanding of what the Big Bang is. We know what
I don't
happened.
think that's the case because genetics didn't fundamentally uh, it didn't really fundamentally change our understanding of evolution
No,
because all of the basic premises of evolution were still true.
but it didn't
It
answer
added
whether life
information to like particularly how parts of it work, but
Correct, but if we're going to use the genetics argument, it's not about genetics and evolution. It's about where does life come from. If we're talking about the Big Bang and what precedes it, it's more similar to then.
No, that's not what evolution is either.
My point is, if we're going to talk about the Big Bang and the scientific knowledge that comes thereafter, that's studyable. If we're going to talk about genetics and evolution, we're talking about what's studyable. But the creation of life, same as the creation of the universe, is what we don't know. And the understanding of that, whether it's a conscious being and coding individuals, or like the reason I brought up the double slit is because I believe that it, somehow concurs that there is a general level of consciousness and awareness to the universe, therefore making things not as just abstract as we think. And so I think it's the same with the Big Bang. Again, what I'm saying is a theory. I'm not proposing that that's true. That's my take on it. But at the end of the day, I think that where it comes from, how life spontaneously develops, and how the universe spontaneously developed are crucial questions that I think are somewhat more important than studying the thereafter. I mean, it's good to know, but at the end of the day, why I think is more important than what. But that's a personal take.
Yeah, but that's a completely different question. So like when you talk about where does life come from, genetics and natural selection aren't aren't designed to tell us where life comes from in the first place, because
Right.
whatever is responsible for abiogenesis would operate according to different laws and different mechanisms. So again, that whatever that's going to be is going to be a completely different branch of science. Now it's going to fall under the umbrella of physical chemistry, I'm sure, but it doesn't. How do I say this? We could have, like, evolution could be an entirely complete theory, even if we didn't know where life came from.
Yep. Because it's studyable. Because there's data
Yeah,
on it. Because that is what it is attainable through the methodology of science. That
yeah.
agreed.
Well,
Because
yeah. I mean, we can't know exactly how life on this planet got started, but we can still make predictions, and build a good model around abiogenesis.
I,
It could
I understand.
it's technically testable in a way.
In a way, right. And again, my point is that when we talk about the Big Bang, when we talk about evolution and so on and so forth, understanding what precedes, again, the difference between conscious creation, universal consciousness, or something like that, all automatically is going to alternate the fabric of everything that we've had before, or alter, rather, not alternate. And so even though we would still have the concrete data of what we're talking about, that's agreed upon, that evolution is a thing. But the why of evolution and where it starts and where it begins and how it forms, the difference in it being a conscious factor as it progresses and develops versus it being just a spontaneous event that is happening an infinite amount of times over in the universe is a very different discussion. And I see why you say it's over 60%, because we're studying what's studyable, and then we're just asking the one big question as to what starts it. The same as with the Big Bang. But at the end of the day, to me, I think that as individuals, and when it comes to how we take these things and incorporate them into our lives, I think the why is more important than the what. I mean, that is the humanistic nature. Philosophical debate and thought, I think, is more rooted in our individual nature than just trying to understand exactly what it is about it and how it progresses. Because, when it comes to genetics, we can learn more and more, and it'll be great to have the in-depth knowledge of DNA coding, and we can use it to create new technology. But answering that question would not be nearly as important as answering is why did life develop, and why did genetic engineering through individuals happen in the first place. It's very different. I mean, that's just my take, but I know they're different fields of study. I'm not denying that. I'm not saying that these questions are supposed to answer, or that these subjects are supposed to answer these other questions. But I'm saying that I think that trying to create a concrete theory is not as relevant as understanding is what created the thing we're trying to make a theory about in the first place.
Okay, but if that's untestable, then what's the point of even trying to come up with an explanation? And I can't remember what else you said. It's like, how could it possibly be more important if it's not even testable, and then we wouldn't even have a reason, like a justification for whatever the proposed answer is.
I'm trying to process that last sentence, but right. My point is simply that understanding the why of the event is more important than understanding and taking the scientific data on the what that comes after it. I think that
Okay, why though? Why?
because it's the root of human nature, not just simply the scientific data. Answering the question of whether there's godly beings or religion, or if it's spontaneous, or if there's alternate answers to this, is kind of a fun, like, if we're just going to hypothesize that there's even an ounce in a million pounds of validity towards answer the ideas of things like creationism, is extremely important, because it's the difference in infinite afterlife or none at all. And I know you may take that as ridiculous, but I think that answering those questions or attempting to postulate a theory about it is, again, more important. You know, to the regular individual, what does advancements in natural genealogy change for them, other than the technology that may come about of it? If unless you're studying that field of science, you're never going that in depth anyways. It's not going to alter your life and how you live.
Um. Okay. I mean, if the point is just to like, if the point is to try to figure out what's the meaning behind all of it, then I mean, okay. Science doesn't have anything to say about that, and I don't. I guess I don't really care to debate it, but
Okay, yeah, I guess we're at a standstill there. Um,
about that particular thing, yeah, probably.